Welcome to Compass Points, the weekly podcast for CompassKnox.com. CompassKnox.com is your best source for news and politics in Knoxville and Knox County. Your hosts today are Scott Barker and Jesse Mayshark, the founders of CompassKnox.com. You can find their daily in-depth coverage and subscribe at CompassKnox.com. The Compass Point podcast is brought to you in conjunction with Almost an Agreement. Almost an Agreement is a layman's attempt to get a handle on the workings in government and politics that we deal with every day. Check them out at almostanagreement.com or subscribe for free on your favorite podcast provider. If you'd like to learn more about the topics discussed on today's podcast, go to CompassKnox.com and subscribe for in-depth coverage and much more. And now, here are your hosts, Scott and Jesse from CompassKnox.com.
Hello and welcome again to Compass Points, the weekly podcast where we talk about Knoxville news, politics, government, education, business, whatever gets our attention. I'm Jesse Mayshark, co-founder and co-publisher of Compass, dialing in remotely today to the studio where I'm joined by Scott Barker, co-publisher and co-founder of Compass. How are you doing there in Knoxville, Scott?
Oh, doing just fine, Jesse. It's a lovely fall day.
Well, I wish I could say the same. I'm up in upstate New York, my hometown here of picturesque Honey Eye Falls. It's nice and autumnal here. The leaves are turning and everything, but it's been pretty much gray and cloudy the whole time I've been here. And as anybody who's spent time in the greater Rochester, New York area can tell you, that is just kind of par for the course. So it has a certain gloomy romance about it, I suppose, but I would stop short of calling it lovely. Anyway,
well, that's really a glass half full look at
right.
Look at the weather in Rochester.
It depends on your mood, I suppose. Well, we do have things there in Knoxville to talk about this week. We will be talking a little bit again about our Congressman Tim Burchett and his role in the still ongoing, like literally right now while we're recording, drama of the House of Representatives. Closer to home, there was another city council candidate forum, and of course, early voting started in the city of Knoxville elections. We're going to talk a little bit about the Knox County's existing ambulance contract and why they are changing it for their new soon-to-be awarded contract. And Scott, let's start out by talking about the University of Tennessee and their plans to build some new dorms. They're going to add, I guess, about a couple thousand new rooms there. But they're doing something different with these dorms, right? What's going on?
Yeah, this is a first ever for Tennessee higher education project. They are building two dorms. Total is close to 2,000, about 1,900. I believe it's 1,920 rooms or beds. The two dormitories. These are not going to be built by the University of Tennessee, however. They're going to be built by private entities. What they're doing is they're using a ground lease where UT retains ownership of the land, and they lease basically the air rights to developers, and the developers build and own the buildings. The developers are Rise Real Estate. They're actually building they're in charge of kind of the construction part of it. And then Provident Group, which is a nonprofit, and they do this all over the country. They're going to be the ones who actually own the building and manage, the building itself, the repair work and the maintenance and that kind of thing. But it's a unique situation in that these that this company, Provident Group, will actually own the building. It'll be their property, and the at least for about 40 years, which is the length of the ground lease. What that means is, though, that they're going to be issuing the bonds to pay for it. These two dorms together will be a little bit north of $240 million, and they're taking on all the risk. They're issuing the bonds. They have to make the bond payments. That's one of the big selling points for the Board of Trustees, which approved this last Friday, or I guess a little bit Friday before last, when people actually listened to this, and that was a big attraction to them. That 100% of the risk is on the developers. The university isn't. If something happens, they don't make the payments on the debt service, and it's their problem, not UT's. That's the essential thing. Although UT can step in and take over the ownership of the project at that point. There's all kinds of contingencies down the line that would enable.
But there's no scenario where UT ends up having to make good on those bonds, right? Like,
right.
If the project fails and the developer sort of pulls out of it, UT gets the properties, but they don't have to pay off the debt.
That is correct. Now they would have to make they would probably have to take on new debt in order to finish it, but as far as the original debt, no, that's the share. The people who buy the bonds will be stuck. They would lose money, and then the Provident Group would be the one. They're the ones on the hook, not UT. Now UT is going to be doing the leasing, so to the students, it will appear that if these are just regular UT dorms, they're going to be, they'll go through UT housing office. UT is going to help set the rates. It's not going to be, it's not going to be like renting from an off campus apartment building. It's going to be like going to a dorm, and what's in it for UT as far as cash flow goes is that anything above operational costs will go, revenues go, that will go to UT as payment on the ground lease. So the first year it's kind of front loaded. UT and they're going to open in 2025. So in 2025, at least, if things go according to plan, they're going to open in the fall of 2025. If in 2025, UT would get a payment of about $5.1 million. Then every year thereafter would be a range. Their estimates kind of vary between $275,000 and $825,000 a year. So that will be UT's quote unquote profit off of those buildings. Now these UT will be required. They are restricted a little bit. Like if they have to, if they want to add more dorms beyond these, although there's a third one that's part of the deal, but it's not finalized yet. It's going to be this winter before it is finalized. So there will actually end up being 3 dorms. And the beyond that, UT will have to do like a student survey, market survey to prove they need to build more on-campus housing before they can, so that it doesn't cut into the developers' occupancy of those dorms. And these now these dorms, one of them be on Caledonia, which is over toward the Cumberland Avenue Strip. One will be in the middle of campus at Andy Holt and Avenue and 20th Street. The third dorm, which is coming up, which will add around 1,000 more beds. So actually, by 2026, when that one will be finished, they'll have an additional 3,000 beds. And to get an idea of the scale, right now they have about 8,300 beds
Right. So this is
campus. It's a significant addition, and
although partly isn't the thinking that some of their existing dorms are nearing the end of their own useful lives and are going to have to be replaced at some point.
Oh yeah, a lot of I think more than half of the housing stock at UT is 60 years old or older, and they have talked about in the future we will be replacing those. Now these aren't replacements though; these are new beds,
right?
And they can build to replace. That's not part of the market study necessarily, but yeah, there will be a lot more construction in the future on, and then it will probably be done through this kind of public-private partnership that is they're doing. That's the new wave. That's what's going to be happening. I mentioned the third dorm is going to be over by Circle Park on Lake Loudon Boulevard. So those will be the three new ones, although only two have been actually approved so far. The third one's approved all but the formal rubber stamping of it. So, but anyway, these this public-private partnership arrangement is kind of the new trend. It's been done elsewhere. Other schools all across the country have done it. This is just the first one that's been done in Tennessee. This deal is set up so theoretically there is no risk to UT. Other schools, for the most part, in looking around the country, most of these types of projects have been just fine, no problem. There was one kind of prominent project that Provident Group, the group that's doing the UT project, did at Oklahoma University that failed spectacularly. But there were some key differences in their business arrangement and the one with UT. One of them being that there was retail space in this dorm that the Oklahoma University was responsible for filling, and they never did. So the Provident Group ended up suing them for breach of contract over that and others. They also didn't fill the spaces, and they were supposed to fill the spaces just like UT is supposed to fill the spaces at their dorms. Anyway, it was big, and then in the middle of all this, there was a change in the presidency of Oklahoma University, and the new president took a dim view of that whole arrangement altogether, and they ended up going to court and then settling it out of court. But like I said, the UT deal is set up, completely different from the way the Oklahoma deal was set up. So they're pretty confident that nothing like that will happen with this arrangement. And UT's looking, they're looking to do this in non-residential buildings as well. Most prominently, the hotel/entertainment district that they're talking about building at the south end of Neyland Stadium, kind of overlooking the river there. That will also they put out a feeler for interest from developers for that. Be a 12-story hotel, then this entertainment district where you could have restaurants and retail, and there'll be areas for tailgating and that sort of thing. And all that would be, those buildings would be owned by private developers as well. And that enables them to open up restaurants and bars, serve alcohol to the general public in a way that they can't do in university-owned properties now, because these properties will be owned by the private developer and not the university.
Right. So it points to an interesting future where some percentage of the large buildings on campus won't actually be owned or managed by the university itself. And as you say, lots of schools around the country are doing this. Of course, there's always questions and suspicions about moves toward privatization. But at least as far as this dorm contract goes, it seems like UT has protected its own interests pretty well.
Oh yeah. It seems to be that they have. I mean, they're very confident that they have. The board of trustees is, is made up of basically a group of business people. They're used to looking at this and looking at things through a business person's eyes, and they're all enthusiastic about it and signed off on it. So you'd think that indeed there is a lot of protection for the university on that. And one thing that should be noted is that these projects work in situations where whatever is in the building generates revenue. Like dormitories generate revenue from rents. Right. This public the entertainment district would generate revenues from leases to restaurant owners, and the hotel from people who stay there. That sort of thing. It wouldn't work for a humanities building.
Right.
Because that doesn't.
Classrooms,
yeah.
Unless
I mean, those
like some dystopian future where you have to put your debit card in at the entrance to the classroom. Don't pay a classroom fee for every class or something. Don't
give them ideas, but yeah, I mean, those would at least for now, at least as far as they've talked about, those would continue to be built by. Through fundraising efforts and all. And one of the interesting things that came out in the board meeting, it didn't report it, but they kind of talked about this, and that's the naming of buildings. And they asked Chancellor Donde Plowman about naming dorms after donors, and they don't do that. Dorms are generally named after people connected with the academic part of the university.
Right.
They don't,
prominent university people.
Yeah, as opposed to prominent donors, like the other. A lot of the academic buildings are named that way, and one of the reasons is that they need to get donors to donate money so they can build the buildings. And if they donate enough of it, they'll name a building after them. Whereas with dorms, as I said earlier, they generate their own revenue, so they really don't need to go out and get Joe Blow, prominent graduate of the business school, to donate a few $1 million to pay for it. So that was kind of interesting.
Like the Tickle College of Engineering.
The Tickle College of Engineering. The business school, the Boyd Center. Those kinds of things are named after donors. So, although the Boyd Center, I guess you could say, is both, since Randy Boyd both is a big donor and is the president of the university. So
right. It's been sort of retrofitted into a UT president.
Absolutely.
Well, all pretty interesting, and I guess we'll see how that trend continues to play out. Speaking of trends, Knox County is in the midst of looking for a new ambulance contractor, which we've written about and talked about before. In fact, they put out an RFP earlier this year, request for proposals, and received 4 bidders for the contract. County Commission is supposed to be getting a recommendation on awarding that contract at its November meeting. So that's being evaluated right now. But in the meantime, County Commission last week had an interesting meeting where they got an overview. So the county hired a consultant as it started this whole process to help them draft that request for proposals and basically look at what do we need in a new ambulance contract. And so that consultant is Fitch and Associates. They're a national firm that does this all over the country, essentially. And they have a lot of expertise in emergency medical systems and response. And basically, what happened at this meeting was a Fitch consultant kind of walked County Commission through what they found in looking at the existing contract, the changes that they recommended for the new contract. And I think this is kind of to prepare commissioners for when they get this contract next month, like what to expect, what they're going to be looking at. And the county, so to be clear about the county ambulance contract, Knox County to date has never paid for ambulance service. And it doesn't provide, Knox County doesn't run an ambulance service. What the contract has been is basically an exclusive award to a private company to handle all of the 911 emergency response countywide. And this is both within the city of Knoxville and outside the city. So unlike some county services, this is actually a county-wide one. And the current contract goes back to 2013. So we haven't had a new contract in 10 years. It's just been extended a few times. It's been in place so long that the contractor we have right now isn't even the one that we started out with, because the original contract was awarded to Rural Metro, which then got bought by American Medical Response, AMR, which is the largest ambulance service in the country. And so AMR now basically provides ambulance service across the county. And basically what this consultant said in talking to County Commission was that old contract, the 2013 contract, is just no longer viable. You could not just renew that contract and have anybody who would bid on it, because they can't make money doing it. And there's a couple of reasons for that. One is just that these systems have gotten more and more expensive to operate as wages have gone up across the industry in order to, stay competitive with other industries. And they're also encountering increasing, and this has been true for many years, but the pandemic made it much, much worse. And it has not really gotten much better, even as the pandemic receded. But these long wait times at emergency rooms, at hospitals, because ambulances are just a transport service, right? They're bringing somebody from one place to another. Most often, the place they're bringing somebody to is a hospital. And when they get to the hospital, they have to wait there until that patient can be safely transferred to the care of the hospital. And so there's a lot, this is a nationwide issue. Emergency rooms across the country are both overrun. They've had increasing demand, and they are also understaffed. We've had a lot of nurses and doctors retire over the course of the pandemic because that work got so demanding, and in a lot of cases, not very rewarding, with people being angry and yelling at you all the time and so forth. So there's, significant challenges across the whole healthcare system. But what the ambulances are running into is, kind of being caught between this contract that requires them to respond to calls within a certain amount of time. The current contract, they're supposed to respond to any place in the county within 17 minutes, 90% of the time. And so anytime they fall below that threshold, they face fines under the contract. And the problem is that this has happened so much that County Commission has had to just forgive these fines. For like the last couple of years, they've just been forgiving millions and millions of dollars in fines, because ambulances are saying, well, we just can't physically meet the terms of the contract, because our ambulances are spending so long sitting at hospitals, and we can't get them back on the road to then respond to calls. So the couple of major changes that the consultant is recommending in the contract, and that I think we can expect to see when this recommendation comes next month. The first one is that this is no longer probably going to be free. Right now the county awards that contract, and the ambulance provider gets paid by the patients, whether that's through their private insurance, through public insurance like Medicaid or Medicare, or even just through private payment by the person themselves. But that's not going to be viable in order to provide the level of service the county wants. And so the consultant is saying that the county can probably expect to pay, and we'll see, what actually gets recommended. But depending on the level of service and amenities and so forth that they want, anywhere from $2 to $3 million is what it's likely to cost the county actually out of pocket. So that'll be the first time the county is actually paying directly for ambulance service. But the second thing is that they recommend instead of just having a county-wide response time that people are held to, breaking the county into three sectors, where you kind of have the city as one sector, because that is the most densely populated area, It's also where the majority of the calls come from, about 2/3 of all calls. Just to give a sense of the volume, AMR responded to nearly 64,000 ambulance calls last year in Knox County, about 175 calls a day. So it's a lot. About 2/3 of those are within the city. So what they're saying is have the city as one sector and then split the rest of the county into an east and west sector. Within the city, for priority one calls, your heart attacks where somebody's like in immediate crisis and at risk of death, they want to see response times of under 10 minutes within the city. Outside the city, where everybody realizes it just takes longer to get an ambulance to Coreyton or to, Concord or wherever, they would have a response time of 20 minutes. And what the consultant said is that now people in those outlying areas might say, hey, I don't like that. They have 10 more minutes to get to me having a heart attack in Coreyton than they do in downtown Knoxville. But the flip side of that is under the current contract, they do have a 17-minute response time, but that is an average overall. It has to be 90% of the calls. And what the consultant said is because so many of the calls are in the city, they can meet that metric by just basically focusing all their resources inside the city, because they don't get that many calls from Coreyton, right? And they can just say, whatever, we'll get to Coreyton when we can get there, because we can still meet our average of being under 17 minutes if we focus in the city. And so that by doing this would ensure that those outlying areas still have some set level that they have to meet and they have to prioritize. So that's what they say we're likely to see when this contract recommendation comes next month. And I guess, we'll just see the details of exactly what gets recommended. And of course, who that provider out of the 4 who responded is. But, Scott, this is like a real literal life or death thing for people, how quickly they can get and how reliably they can get ambulance service. It's something everybody kind of expects is just going to happen when you call 911. The reality is, under our current situation, it's not the kind of guarantee that I think people want to see. And so the hope is that with the new contract and with the county putting some actual resources into it, we can at least assure some level of emergency response.
Yeah, and one thing is, with the county's growing population, outside the city limits, it becomes, more and more important, obviously, because there are more and more calls. While it's still much lower than number than the calls in the city, more people live outside the city limits in Knox County than live inside the Knoxville city limits. So, and this, kind of looking at the big picture a little bit. They recently had a consultant look at the fire service in Knox County as well, the fire service outside the Knoxville city limits, because unlike the ambulance service, the city of Knoxville provides its own fire department and fire service inside the city limits. But it was a very similar things, were coming up, and things about management of the fire system and things like that. And it seems like, part of that was essentially the same thing that they're saying now with the ambulance contract is things need to be modernized more. The county is going to have to do more. And it's almost like, the county is becoming more urbanized. It's more, urbanized might be a little strong, but there's more populous, it is much denser now in the county than it was 20 years and 30 years ago. So, it's coming to the point, maybe at some point down the line, where the county will have to directly provide these services, perhaps, in the same way that the city does, because in the city, the fire department's paid for out of tax funds, and it's not that way in the county. And, as Knox County continues to grow, outside the city limits of Knoxville, and, we'll be talking about growth in Knox County in a minute too. It becomes more and more likely that at some point in the future, Knox County will have to provide, be provide the fire service and provide the ambulance service that is currently done on a contract basis.
Right, and provide, and whether that is done through direct public funding like the Knoxville Fire Department is, or through a private contract, that there's a likelihood that there still needs to be some level of public participation. That basically, as you're saying, the model outside the city that we have really comes from, the old, much more rural days of Knox County, where you could kind of rely on a volunteer fire department here and a volunteer fire department there. And then, of course, with rural metro, you have a subscription service, but that's still only paid for. I think only about 50% of the people in the rural metro area actually subscribe to rural metro.
I think it's a little lower than that, actually. I'm thinking it's around 40, if I recall correctly. I'd have to go back and look, because I did a piece on the fire consultants report a few months ago, and which is why that was still fresh in my mind. But yeah, I mean, it's people basically are rolling the dice on whether they're going to need fire service or not. And of course, if they do end up needing fire service and they don't have a subscription to a rural metro and they don't live in an area that's served by a volunteer fire department, then it can get really expensive. Because they have to actually pay for the call if that happens. So
yeah. Well, and so circling back to the ambulance contract, a couple of the other things the consultant mentioned were things that can't probably be addressed directly in the contract, but they're things that affect ambulance service and that will require the engagement of other partners. One of those is this issue of the hospital wait times, which you can't write that into the ambulance contract, that like you're not allowed to wait too long at the hospital, because that's something they can't control, but they're going to need to work there. And this is something AMR has already been working with the hospitals on, but clearly there's much more to be done there, just to try to keep these ambulances from just literally sitting in a parking lot when they need to be responding to calls. The other thing that they identified was that there's a specific area of the city that consumes a tremendous amount of resources, which is the area what the report calls the Mission District, but the area around all the homeless service providers on North Broadway. That area by itself accounts for about 5% of all ambulance calls in the county. 1 out of every 20 ambulance calls is going there. And the thing is, a lot of those calls, when they look at them, like, people are calling 911 because they don't have health insurance, they don't have a doctor they can go to, and they don't even have a way to get themselves to a clinic. They don't have any transportation or anything. So people call 911 for things that they don't actually need, that aren't emergencies, basically. And about half of their calls in that area, they said, are like that. So they're looking at working in the county health department and the hospitals, looking at working with the local homeless service providers to just, are there ways that they could have, there is a Cherokee Health Clinic sort of right there, but are there ways that they can provide other kinds of medical services and clinics there that could address some of those basic needs and just cut down on ambulances constantly having to run there? So those are other things that kind of can't be solved in the contract, but affect the system anyway.
Yeah, that would be not only does you can't address it in the contract, but that's also a very intricate arrangement that would have to be made, because whoever the county health department isn't they don't actually do primary care, which is what a lot of this would be, and so having a provider have a location there and the services for people who don't have insurance at all, and there's a lot of there's a reason the private sector hasn't done it, and so sure. there needs to be it would take a multi-pronged effort to get something like that done. Although the need, I mean, this ambulance study highlights the need for something like that would benefit. It would benefit the people who need those services tremendously, to not have to go to a hospital for minor relatively minor things.
Yep. All right. Well, speaking of homelessness, that was among the issues that got talked about this week at a city council candidate forum that, Scott, you served as both moderator and reporter for, or in multiple hats. And of course, that was just a couple of days before early voting started, which started this last Wednesday. So I guess, what were the highlights of that candidate forum, and how's the early voting picture looking so far?
Okay, yeah. Well, first with the forum, it was held at West High School, the League of Women Voters of Knoxville and Knox County. Big shout out to them and their partners. They have a long list of partner organizations that I will not go through right now, but suffice it to say that they all have been. It's kind of one of their missions, and they do a really good job putting these forums on every election, despite their choice in moderator for this most recent one. But it was very sparsely attended. That was one of the things that you noticed at the and I don't think that's not a reflection on the league getting out word about it. I think it's more of a reflection of the fact that the general election doesn't have the mayor's race at the top of the ballot, so it's not going to be I think a lot of people have tuned out, and we'll get to that in a minute, from city politics. And but anyway, we also only have two of the four seats that are up this year on city council are contested. The other two are not. So you really only have two contested city council races on the ballot, and along with the municipal judge race when they had their forum week prior. But the one thing was kind of interesting. The two candidates who were unopposed had different views on participating. One was Lynn Fugit, who is the incumbent in at-large seat A, and she showed up. She came to the forum, even though she has no opponent. Answer the questions, get out, to talk about what her priorities would be moving forward. Charles Thomas, who represents the 5th District and is unopposed, did not attend, and he said, quite frankly, he's unopposed. He didn't want to, take time and attention away from the candidates who are in contested races. So it's kind of an interesting aside. But they talked about Knoxville Police Department, co-response, alternative response issue that we've talked about here. A lot of talk about housing and land use, and affordable housing and that sort of thing. And one of the things that things that pop up is, of course, you've got the two races that are contested. Seat B, an at-large seat B, is R. Bentley Marlowe, who is a redeveloper, essentially in focusing on the Mechanicsville area, and Debbie Helsley, who's a former union officer and was a candidate for county mayor last year, and they're squaring off. And then the other race is at-large seat C, which is Tim Hill, who is a developer and also serves on the Metropolitan Planning Commission. That's the old word for it. The Knox County Planning Commission and the Sports Authority is running against Amelia Parker, who's the incumbent city council member for that seat. So now obviously when they started talking about land use and things like that, Marlowe and Hill were probably a little more comfortable talking about things like that. Although they talked about the need to provide more housing. We are in a housing crisis in a way, in that more people are moving to Knoxville, and then there are places for them to live. One of the things they talked about, affordable housing, which is kind of the way to prevent homelessness. They didn't really talk about didn't get to homelessness as a question. All the questions came from the audience, and there was a question about homelessness that didn't have time to get to that, but they did address it kind of sideways in talking about housing. And one of the things that they talked about were TIFs and pilots, which are the incentives given to developers to build things. And Hill basically said, we've already got these. We need to use these tools. Parker emphasized that she wants to see all of those TIFs and pilots basically used for affordable housing. Now they can be used for a variety of projects, and she wants to focus entirely on affordable housing. She's made that a big part of her platform that she's running on is the need for affordable housing. And you had discussion about KPD. Everybody mentioned the need for recruiting police officers, which has been a problem. They're always down 50 or 60 officers, and have been for years. Debbie Helsley pointed out that she was on the Civil Service Merit Board, I think it was in the years ago, and said it was a problem then, it's a problem now, and and it's it's gotten worse because people are just not interested in going into police work as they once were. And varying degrees of support for Chief Noel, Hill, Marlowe, and Helsley in particular talked about how he needs support and needs time to make some of the changes he wants to make in KPD. The alternative response versus the co-responder model talk is kind of a differentiator in some of these. And to refresh everyone's memory, KPD right now is involved in a co-response model for calls that involve mental health crises and overdoses, things like that are not, they're non-violent calls. They have a co-response team. It consists of a police officer and a mental health professional, and they go in tandem to these calls and try to resolve them, without resorting to arrest or anything like that. There's been a proposal, and it's got a lot of traction, and they're looking into doing this for what's called an alternative response, and that is taking the police department out of the equation and using a medic or paramedic, whatever, some type of medical professional along with the mental health professional to go to these calls, because sometimes people that would want to take that need this kind of help are reluctant to call 911 because they don't want the police involved for whatever reason. So,
right.
Amelia,
and so those were all the and we'd heard them talk about all of these issues essentially through the whole campaign. So now we're in the home stretch, as you say. Not a lot of turnout at the forum, and at least I guess we only have the first. Do we have the first couple days totals now? Anyway, it's not looking like a whole lot of people are showing up to vote either.
Yeah. The getting ready to get into the early voting thing. Early voting start. This was on Monday. They had the forum on Wednesday. Early voting started. There's a day's lag in reporting that. Today's Friday. We're just getting Wednesday's numbers in, so we only have 1 day of early voting figures in at the moment. And on the first day, 675 people voted. Now, the people are voting in person and by absentee ballots. As a point of comparison, the first day in the primary, and the primary wound up having only 16% turnout, which is, abysmally low, but is pretty par for the course for city primaries. 732 people voted on the first day in the primary, so there's been a drop off, pretty significant drop off there between the primary and the general election. Again, the mayor's race isn't on the ballot, and that generally there's generally some more interest whenever the mayor's race is on the ballot. It's not on the ballot because Mayor India Kincannon won in the primary. She got more than half the vote and didn't need to go to a general election. So, but the big difference is not in absentee. In fact, there are a couple more people voted absentee this time than in the primary. The big drop off was in person voting. So that does not bode well for turnout, but it's only one day. But still,
well, actually, I have breaking news for you, because I have just called up on my computer, and the Election Commission has added Thursday's numbers.
They're not lagging then. So good.
So right, so that first day of that total, only 382 of those votes were in person. The second day, it was actually a little bit lower, only 362 votes on day 2 of early voting. So again, that's just kind of showing the same.
Yeah. It's pretty pretty dim outlook, I think, for turnout. And of course, what that means is that the candidates will have to get their core supporters out and make sure they vote, because they're going to, in a low turnout election, that's who wins, is whoever can get out the people who are the core supporters, have the biggest number of core supporters. And so these candidates
also,
really have to work.
I mean, for City of Knoxville residents who are eligible to vote, the fact that it's going to be a low turnout election means your vote counts more. Your vote will be a higher percentage of the final outcome.
Oh, yeah.
Because almost none of your fellow citizens are voting here. So, if you want an election where you can make a difference, this is one of them.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if turnout, like I said, 16% in the primary, if it's 10% or so, which is not out of the realm of possibilities in the general election, that means you've had your say more than nine of your fellow citizens who didn't vote, because we've got about almost 104,000 registered voters in the city of Knoxville. So if 10,000 people vote, then your vote counts.
For sure. All right. Well, speaking of votes and whether they count, the House of Representatives this week has had a couple of votes in their ongoing attempt to elect a new Speaker of the House. And we talked about this the other week because our own Congressman Tim Burchett was one of just 8 Republicans who basically voted to fire former Speaker Kevin McCarthy and ousted him from his position after just about 9 months in office. And, Burchett, in the first effort to replace or to appoint a successor to McCarthy, Burchett had supported Steve Scalise, the Republican from Louisiana, who was not able to get sufficient votes and ended up withdrawing his candidacy before it even went to the floor for a vote. So this week, Representative Jim Jordan of Ohio, who had been sort of the other major figure contending with Scalise previously, he made his push and has also not been able to get to that 217 votes. Now, Burchett has he supported Scalise before, saying that he had gotten more support from the rest of the Republican conference than Jordan, and so that's why he supported Scalise. Now he's been supporting Jordan, and he's basically just been saying, look, we need to elect somebody here. But of course, Jim Jordan has some very real obstacles because he is kind of the leader. He's the founder of the Freedom Caucus in the House, which is kind of the far right, most conservative faction, most confrontational and combative faction. Jordan defied a subpoena from the House's own committee investigating the January 6th invasion of the Capitol. He's been a strong supporter of Donald Trump's completely baseless claims that the 2020 election was stolen. And there have just been enough moderate Republicans and people in the House who are suspicious of having somebody who's kind of made his career as a bomb thrower, naming him as the speaker. So that's all still a muddle. The kind of, I guess, funny thing with Burchett is, as all that's been going on and they've not yet, I mean, this is still going on Friday. It's possible they'll still elect Jim Jordan at some point. Who knows? Certainly not making any predictions at this point. Burchett on Thursday kind of turned his attention away from the speaker's race, which didn't seem to be going anywhere, and let us all know that he is continuing to pursue another one of his top priorities and interests, which is unidentified anomalous phenomena, UAPs, what we used to call UFOs, flying saucers, whatever's up there. And Burchett did announce that he and other House members are going to have a couple of classified briefings with the Department of Defense and from the intelligence community, kind of about what they know about all of this. Those won't be public hearings, which is really what Burchett's been pushing for. But so, you know, Scott, I guess in the absence of the House being able to really conduct any business, maybe Burchett's kind of trying to show that, well, we are still going to try to get some things done here. If we can't elect a speaker, maybe we can at least find out what's going on with the flying saucers.
Yeah, and well, now one thing is, and nobody's talked about this, probably for good reason. You know, the Speaker of the House does not necessarily have to be a member of Congress. Doesn't have to be a member of the House. Yeah, that's the, you know, it always has been, but doesn't necessarily have to be. Maybe Burchett can recruit an alien to actually come in and impose some order in the House of Representatives, and so maybe it is all tied together.
Your wisdom from the stars.
Yeah, you know, it couldn't hurt.
Yeah, I mean, under current circumstances, I think they're getting a little bit desperate. So who knows? But our congressman is certainly keeping himself busy in the midst of all of that. All right, Seth, why don't we go ahead and take a quick break, and then we will come back and answer a reader question. We are to the Q&A portion of the podcast. Every week we go on to our subscriber-only Facebook group, the Compass Colloquy, which you can join if you're a Compass subscriber, which you can become at compassknox.com. And we ask our readers if there's anything in particular they would like to hear talked about on the podcast. We had a couple of questions this week, and Scott, one of them had to do with the ongoing redevelopment of the former Austin Homes public housing complex there in East Knoxville, just east of downtown. So what do you have to tell us about that?
Well, they are in moving toward completion of what is now called First Creek at Austin. It is, as you said, just east of downtown. And one of the interesting things is it's basically just beyond First Creek from the left field of the baseball stadium that's being built, or the multi-use stadium that's going to be mostly baseball, that's being built there at the edge of the old city. So it's kind of a centralized location. It's not. This is basically it is replacing the old Austin Homes. A lot of Austin Homes had already been torn down before this project began. There were still 129 units of the old Austin Homes there. They raised those units, and they're going to replace them with about 420 apartments. 1, 2, 3 bedroom apartments, primarily for low income people. It's kind of it is a little bit unique. Most of the public housing complexes have traditionally been for the very low income residents, basically up to 30% of the median income for the area. This community is a different focus. HUD is encouraging this through a program, and it's what they refer to as mixed income. Now, that doesn't mean what most of us think of when we think of mixed income, because we think of mixed income, we think of, middle class, upper middle class, wealthy people living in the same location with people who are living, below the median income to poor. But that's not the case here. What it is basically along the continuum of low income. There are some units that are going to be set aside for people who make up to 30% of the median income for the area, and that's about that level is about $24,800. It's about a little bit less than $25,000. So some units will be set aside for families that make, or individuals who make less than that, and that's the level. And I'm going to use when I use these figures, it's the level for 3-person families, because it varies by family size, but I just settled on three-person families for this. There are also many that are set aside for people making up to 60% of the median income, which would be a family of 3 making less than $46,700. And so to give you an idea of what that is, if you make $15 an hour, you'll bring in $31,200 a year. Mm-hmm. So these are people that are trying to raise kids on a very, very small amount of money. The maximum basically is somebody who's 80% of the poverty of the median income, which is where the low income level starts according to HUD. And those are people, a three-member family making up to $62,000 a year would qualify for that. And so that's the kind of range of people living there. One of the philosophies and one of the things that is the market, quote unquote, market rate for these apartments. A 2-bedroom apartment, their listing is the market rate at $1,560 a month, which is about 30% of the person making the highest income level you can have there. So that's where the housing burden starts. So it's these are all affordable, what are classified as affordable housing units. And the whole philosophy behind having a mix of incomes and not having just very low income residents living there is to make kind of a healthier community, where you do have you might have some people who are there who are primarily on assistance of some sort. You've got others who are working families, and the mix is that mix creates a healthier community. That's the theory behind HUD's program that they're using to do this. So this will be this is 420 units of affordable housing that have gone up, right in downtown, right at the edge of downtown, conveniently located. It's got one of the things that people talk about as well. These developments have access to jobs and that sort of thing. There's a greenway that connects to the old city, where you have restaurants and shops and stores and all, and it's also a short distance away from downtown, where you've got a lot of business as well. So, and just a stone's throw from Magnolia Avenue, where there are more businesses now, along that corridor. So in theory, this is an ideal location for, low income, or affordable housing for people, who, not only for jobs, but for shopping and for restaurants and that sort of thing.
Sure. Yeah. And obviously, like you say, it reflects this kind of philosophical shift in the public housing realm, which has been going on now for more than a generation, really, away from the 20th century model, which I think a lot of people ended up feeling like created a lot of problems by really concentrating poverty, and that they're trying to not do that.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's part of the philosophy behind what they did with college homes back in the 90s, which was college homes was a traditional apartment housing complex there, and they basically tore it all down and replaced it with some single but also multifamily housing there in Mechanicsville, and I think that I haven't gone back and done a statistical analysis of it, but things, I think the crime rate's gone down because you don't have the concentration of poverty there that you had at one time, and that's the whole point. Part of the point is to have these mixed income communities where there is less crime, and the schools can improve because they'll have people who have students who are not from real low income families, and I don't want to make that sound bad, but one of the things that has been shown is that low income students from low income families do better when they're in schools that have a mix of incomes and not just low income schools. So that's the philosophy behind this whole thing. It has been going on for years, and it is playing out too. It's kind of similar to a little bit to what they're doing in 5 Points, and it's going to be kind of similar to what they're going to be doing in Western Heights.
Right. Lots of different, slightly, variations in how they approach it.
Yeah, I mean,
all of this moving away from what we used to call the projects.
Yeah,
right?
Yeah, and and one thing that's kind of interesting about Austin, or First Creek at Austin. I need to call it by what its name is now. First Creek at Austin is it kind of when you take a look at that area. You've got First Creek at Austin. There are a lot of other privately managed affordable housing apartments there between there and kind of downtown Civic Auditorium Coliseum area. There are also high price condominiums over on the riverfront. You're going to have the development around the baseball stadium that has pretty high end development there, and then you've got a lot of other apartments that are more mid-range apartments around that area. It really is becoming a real mixed income area, not just one development. But when you take all these developments as a whole, you've got a pretty broad range of incomes, and there. It would be a stretch to call that a community because there's a lot of I don't know how much interaction there actually that community interaction you think of as a neighborhood, but the elements are there. It's a pretty broad range of incomes in that one spot.
Sure. Well, and the city is obviously investing in things like greenway infrastructure and so forth to provide more connection between all of those areas and just make it easy for everybody to kind of get around there.
Yeah, like the First Creek at Austin, there is a greenway that connects it over to the stadium area that they're going to make improvements on as the stadium goes on. And then also one of the interesting things is at a block east of the stadium is Georgia Avenue, which dead ends at the banks of First Creek. And First Creek at Austin is on the other side of First Creek. They aligned a street in the First Creek development to come up. The right of way comes up to that point on First Creek across from the end of Georgia Avenue. So there is possibility that they could build a bridge there, a very short bridge. It'd be little more than a culvert. It would be fairly inexpensive to do to give it an actual street connection between First Creek at Austin and the area around the stadium and the old city there, which I think would be welcomed by a lot of people who believe in interconnectivity and try to make it easier to connect communities.
Right. All right. Well, let's take a look ahead to next week. We do have actually several things on the agenda. Of course, early voting continues through this week, so get out and vote. Knox County Commission will hold its monthly voting meeting Monday at 5 o'clock. Not a super exciting agenda. The two most interesting things on it, which was the ambulance contract we talked about earlier, and also a move to hire somebody to develop a unified development ordinance. Both of those got deferred to November, so those aren't happening. So not a super exciting meeting, but certainly we will be observing it and report on anything that happens there. And then Scott, the Sports Authority, speaking of the stadium, is meeting Tuesday morning, right?
Yeah, the Sports Authority is having their monthly meeting. It's now that construction is underway and it's ongoing, their meetings have primarily consisted of getting updates on how construction's going, the internship program that they have, the disadvantaged business enterprise participation in the project, because there's still a few contracts that are still to be let, those kinds of things. And so it's not usually not too many earth-shattering decisions getting made at the Sports Authority anymore, but we are still keeping track of that. One way to keep track of the stadium progress is that on Thursday there's going to be a candidate forum for the city council candidates. It's going to focus on homelessness issues, and it's going to be at St. Luke's Episcopal Church at 7 on Thursday.
Okay, and then also on Tuesday, Knox County's Growth Policy Coordinating Committee is getting back together, something that happens very rarely. But we talked about this the other week, and you can find more information about it on our website because we've written about this. But basically, this is the next step in the county's advanced Knox planning process. The county wants to change its growth and development map, basically designating the areas where certain kinds of development will be encouraged and foreseen. But to do that, under state law, they have to first change the county's growth policy plan. And that requires them to get together with representatives from the city of Knoxville, town of Farragut, the school system, local utilities, the soil conservation district, a bunch of different people to consider those changes and vote on them. So the first meeting of that committee is going to happen Tuesday at 5 o'clock in the main assembly room of the city county building. They will have to then meet again in November to actually vote on those changes. And then those changes would have to go and be independently approved by county commission, city council, and Farragut's board of mayor and aldermen. So lots of bureaucratic hoops to jump through there, but all of that is aimed at basically allowing the county to update its overall plan and development map. And then also on Thursday, Knox County School Board will have a work session. This is a quarterly work session to kind of talk about big picture items. It'll be at 5:00 Thursday in the Summer Place boardroom. The one thing we're definitely looking for there is discussion and a recommendation on what kind of new school they're going to build in Farragut. We talked about that the other week. The school board approved buying a new piece of property in Farragut for a new school, but they have not yet decided whether that's going to be an elementary school or a middle school. There seems to be a push, a movement by the administration probably for a middle school. That seems like the recommendation we're going to get, but we'll find out about that on Thursday. And then, of course, we will report on all of that and be back to talk to you about it next week. I will most likely still be calling in remotely next week, as long as the internet holds up here. So, Scott, anything to add down there in Knoxville?
No, just hope everything you're able to get back soon, and get back in the swing of things down here. But I'll hold down the fort here while you're up there, and we'll get through. And it's I just do want to remind people one more time to get out and who are living in this who live and are registered to vote in the city of Knoxville. Get out and vote this week.
All right. Thanks as always to Lord Seth Barber for his production efforts there at Barbarian Productions. Our theme music is by Will Wright, and we'll talk to you later.
Welcome to Compass Points, the weekly podcast for CompassKnox.com. CompassKnox.com is your best source for news and politics in Knoxville and Knox County. Your hosts today are Scott Barker and Jesse Mayshark, the founders of CompassKnox.com. You can find their daily in-depth coverage and subscribe at CompassKnox.com. The Compass Point podcast is brought to you in conjunction with Almost an Agreement. Almost an Agreement is a layman's attempt to get a handle on the workings in government and politics that we deal with every day. Check them out at almostanagreement.com or subscribe for free on your favorite podcast provider. If you'd like to learn more about the topics discussed on today's podcast, go to CompassKnox.com and subscribe for in-depth coverage and much more. And many thanks to William Wright for composing our theme song. Compass Points is a partnership of Barking Shark Media and Barbarian Productions, and recorded by Lord Seth A. Barber at Barbarian Studios, Knoxville, Tennessee.